these are the leaders. These are the people who should know better, who should be taking their job of leadership seriously, and have abdicated responsibility. And even more so, these are people who've literally decided to take up arms or to start a coup against Moses. What's so powerful about Korach, as we oftentimes remind people, is that he's the son of Yizchar, the son of Kohat, the son of Levi, which means Moses and him are both Levites. But even more so, they're both grandsons of Kohat. Kohat had, as you remember, a couple of sons. One of them was Amram, and one of them was Izhar. So Korach and Moshe are first cousins from the tribe of Levi. But even more so, within their clan, they're from the subgroup of Kohat, and we should have known better. And, of course, he's got some good credibility as Moses' cousin. He takes with him two members, Datan and Abiram, that are from the tribe of Reuben. On as well is also from the tribe of Reuben, but Datan and Abiram are brothers, and then On is also from the tribe of Reuben. And Reuben, of course, is the oldest tribe. Reuben is the oldest son, and therefore kind of they're the oldest tribe. And so this is, am I still on? It says that you lost. Harvey just said you lost me. Oh, I hope not.
I didn't lose you.
Okay. Because I did put us on for a second, maybe when we went on Facebook.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. So this is a tribe that, again, people look to as kind of the old guard. But it's not just those three guys, because it then also says that 250 Israelites who are chiefs chosen in the assembly, people who had already been established as helpers of Moses. 250.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. And we don't know how many chieftains there were. We don't know, how many people were considered chiefs of tribes, but it's a lot. I mean, even with, again, 600,000 men, there are a lot of even if you figure there are 1,000 chiefs, I don't think there were, but let's say there were, it's still a quarter of them that rebel. So it's a huge, huge problem that it's not just 250 people or 253, or 254, including Korach, but it is 250 of the leaders. And it says they combined against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You've gone too far, for all the community are holy, all of them, and the Lord is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourselves above the Lord's congregation?" When Moses heard this, he fell on his face. And of course, this is very reminiscent of what we read a couple of weeks ago when Moses' own brother, the other guy standing next to him right here, Aaron and Miriam, challenged Moses. Now that was bad. This is also bad. And to some extent, what happens here is that the challenge that the guys have here is similar to what the other challenge of Moses, to Moses from Aaron and Miriam was, except here it's one of almost more of a democracy. Like, who says, Moses, that you should be higher than everybody else? Because God is amongst all of us. So aren't we all essentially holy? Aren't we all special? And so the challenge from the standpoint of what they say is interesting, because it seems as though their claim is one of, let's all be holy. And so there's a point to it, which is, that's legitimate. It's legitimate. But obviously there's something else going on here, which is, what happened? Why did they do this? Was there some argument? Was there some situation that prompted them to do this? And so the rabbis say, yes, there was something that Moses said, or that, happened, where the people, these chiefs, were upset. Maybe it's that Moses told them you can't go into the promised land, because remember, that's what we read in the last portion in Shalach. We're told they can't go into the promised land. So people forget that the Korach situation comes right. And again, one of the problems of not having class last week is that I'm going to take you back 2 weeks ago when we read Shalach. The people just found out they're going to spend 40 years essentially in the wilderness. That's enough to make people get upset. That's enough to make people say, Moses, what are you doing? Who are you to tell us we can't go into the land? So maybe that's what did it. Whatever it was, there's definitely a feeling of this isn't good, but we don't know what it is. And so the rabbis have a very famous phrase that we say, and whenever we study this portion, we have to say it, which is that we don't know what the reason was. We don't know what they fought about. The Torah doesn't preserve it. The Torah only preserves arguments for the sake of heaven. What we say, l'shem shamayim, machloket shem shamayim. Disagreements that are for the sake of heaven. Those ones we keep. But we don't keep disagreements that are about nothing, that are really, as this one was, an ego issue of people trying to claim power for themselves for the sake of power, but it had nothing to do with any real legitimate issue. The Torah understands that people can have disagreements, that human beings are going to have disagreements, and they are, and sometimes very, very important, and that there's a truth, a holy truth, a truth that needs to be respected when those arguments come about, and that both sides need to some extent, from the outset, recognize when you're arguing for the sake of heaven that maybe the other side does have a valid point, and that there is some truth to what they say. And so you argue it out. You bring your argument to the court, to the Sanhedrin, to the discussion, to the chamber, and you deliberate over it. You discuss it. Now, again, you can reflect, and of course, everybody wants to think about how does it relate to today's government and to the fact that we have such polar opposites and such fighting that goes on, and there's such partisanship that we don't have a lot of cooperation and we don't have a lot of respect for the other side. And so oftentimes people will look at that, and I'm sure lots of synagogues, have been reflecting on this as they've read Korach, right? They've said, why aren't we respecting each other and the differences that we have? And the reality is that, well, you want to know something? Some of these are not arguments for the sake of heaven. That's why we're not doing this. And so these are legitimate issues. And again, in Israel right now, there are legitimate issues that are being debated for the sake of heaven. In the United States, there are legitimate issues that are being debated for the sake of heaven. Unfortunately, those ones are oftentimes not the ones that we talk about. I mean, there's real issues when it comes to, spending, how do we spend money to prime the economy? And there are people who say, well, you got to do this, you got to, and there's probably some truth to both sides. But those arguments are oftentimes not the ones that we actually discuss. The interesting thing is when the parties actually agree, no one talks about it. And it usually just, gets approved, and nobody ever talks about the fact that, yeah, there was a bipartisanship on that. But there are legitimate arguments there. And there are ones that people hopefully will give and take, and there'll be compromise, and someone will come in and say, you know what, well, we'll do 1.2 trillion, or we'll do 900 million, and 900 billion, and then we'll come up with a solution. I mean, those kinds of things are arguments to some extent for the sake of heaven. But we also have arguments that are really not, and we don't preserve those. The Torah says they don't warrant to be remembered in perpetuity. And what's the best example? This one right here, the example of Korach. And so the rabbis say in the Talmud, this is an example of an argument that was not for the sake of heaven. So we really don't know what happened. What's a good argument for the sake of heaven? The arguments they said between Hillel and Shammai. And we kept in the Talmud these disagreements between the two schools of Hillel and Shammai, because people said, there was, we usually agree with Hillel. But by the way, we agree with Hillel because he also taught the other side and he respected the other side, by the way. That's why we say we usually go with Hillel. But his arguments in many cases were as logical as the ones of Shammai. But their arguments are kept. And they argued about stuff. They argued about which way you're supposed to light a menorah, whether you add candles to it or whether you take candles away. Shammai said you take candles away. Hillel said, of course, we add a candle every night, which is what we do. But Shammai had a great answer, which is, well, every night there was a little less oil, so let's take down a little candle. And we know it lasts for 8 days, but we took off a little bit each day because the oil did go down. But Hillel said, no. The miracle increased every day, because every day that there was still oil, that was the increase of the miracle. So we increased the candles for the miracle. And so that's the logic behind Hillel. But Shammai's argument was, let's recreate what happened, which was the oil was going down, but it didn't go down all the way. There was still something. So look, I mean, it's an argument that we have because the Talmud preserved it.
But it wasn't between people about their egos.
Yes. And so that's one of the things that we say. Look, let's remember something here, which is that especially, again, leaders have a responsibility to argue and to debate, especially, again, in a deliberative body like Congress, or specifically the Senate, which used to be called the most deliberative house, that they're supposed to have these arguments. They're supposed to have these discussions. And again, it's one of the reasons why even some Democrats are opposed to filibusters, because they say, look, it's going to decrease the ability for parties to argue and to discuss and to use the process of compromise and the process of discussion and debate in order to establish consensus. But of course, the problem now is that anybody who gives into the other side is considered a traitor instead of actually somebody that is trying to work together. So that's sad that that's now become a black mark on someone's record if they cooperate with the other side. It used to be that there was regional alliances, or people had they voted in favor together on issues of economics, and they weren't necessarily all Democrats or Republicans. That there would be union represented states had certain ideas, and they may not all be Republicans and Democrats together. So anyways, that just doesn't happen anymore. So that's again what I think a lot of people are thinking about right now. We're going to show one other thing why this is interesting, or hyper relevant, if you will. So but Moses's reaction, of course, like it was with Moses's even closer familial rebellion with Aaron and Miriam, she falls on his face. So he spoke to Korach and all his company, saying, come morning, the Lord will make known who is his and who is holy, and will grant him access to himself. He will grant access to the one he has chosen. Do this, you, Korach, and all your band, take fire pans, and tomorrow put fire in them and lay incense on them before the Lord. Then the man whom the Lord chooses, he shall be the holy one. You have gone too far, sons of Levi. And notice, by the way, he's a son of Levi. He's a Levite, but he calls this group, Korach's band, the Levites, sons of Levi. They weren't all Levites, but he calls them sons of Levi because to some extent he recognizes that these are some of these people are his own people. So again, this is kind of a recognition that the rebellion is also coming it's coming from within his own family. So Moses said to Korah, and again, remember the fire pans because Levi, the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron, they got burned up with a fire pan. So the people are probably thinking, wow, that is a pretty established way of testing whether or not God is happy or not with you. So they had to be thinking that. Moses said further to Korah, hear me, sons of Levi. It is not enough for you that God has set you apart from the community of Israel and given you access to him to perform the duties of the Lord's tabernacle and to minister to the community and serve them. You're already Levites. Now that he has advanced you and all your fellow Levites with you, do you seek the priesthood too? Which is interesting, by the way, because maybe there's a play here or a lesson that the Levites need to be put in their place. Interesting that Moses does this because he's a Levite. He's not a Kohen. His brother's a Kohen, but he's a Levite. Truly, it is against the Lord that you and all your company have banded together. For who is Aaron that you should rail against him? Moses sent Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, but they said, we will not come. So with Korach and his group, the Levites, he speaks to them. Dathan and Abiram, they won't even come. They won't even come. And then Moses says, is it not enough that you brought, this is what they said to him, first. Is it not enough that you brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey to have us die in the wilderness, that you should also lord it over us? Even if you had brought us to a land flowing with milk and honey and given us possessions of fields and vineyards, should you gouge out those men's eyes? We will not come. So notice that when they don't come, the message that they give to Moses is, you took us from a land, Egypt, flowing with milk and honey. And of course, what's really going on here? Maybe that issue of they've just been told that they're never going to the land flowing with milk and honey. And so they say, look, even if you took us to that place that you say is flowing with milk and honey, now you're telling us we can't see it. And the language, the poetic language that they say is, should you gouge out those men's eyes, we will not come. So again, maybe what prompts this is the knowledge that they're not going to be able to go in. But of course, what do they use against Moses again? It's that you took us from a better place. Well, now they're going to die in the wilderness. So you could actually make the argument that, yeah, the alternative is not great. The alternative is not great. But of course, they played on that line, Eretz Zavat Chalavu Devash, Eretz, a land flowing with milk and honey. Moses was much aggrieved, and he said to the Lord, pay no regard to their oblation. I have not taken the ass of any one of them, nor have I wronged any one of them. And so God says to Moses, I don't understand what they're complaining about. I didn't do anything. I didn't steal anything from them. I didn't take anything from them. I didn't wrong any of them. I have no idea what they're basing this on. And God, don't pay attention to them. Now, again, we already know God knows what they're about. God's already told these people they're not going to be able to come into the land. They've already been punished. He knows. I mean, but he still says to God, please, God, don't listen to them. He does. He says that to him. Don't pay attention to them. And Moses said to Korah, tomorrow you and all your company appear before the Lord, you and they and Aaron. Each of you take his fire pan and lay incense on it. Each of you bring his fire pan before the Lord, 250 fire pans, that you and Aaron will also bring your fire pans. Each of them took his fire pan, put fire in it, laid incense on it, and took his place at the entrance of the tent of meeting, as did Moses and Aaron. And as you notice, because of what is happening here and the fact that it seems like 250 chieftains are coming out, it doesn't seem so much like they're chieftains. It seems like there's 250 Levites. It doesn't really seem like these are chieftains from amongst the tribes. This almost sounds like they're all Levites. It's interesting because, again, maybe what is really going on here is a statement about those Levites who later on, during the time when Israel actually inhabited the promised land, you had local Levites that were leading the people in those communities as local priests to some extent. So what actually might be happening here in the Korach story, I'm proposing, and I'm not the one who originated this, but I'm proposing that there actually might be a political statement about what happens later on, which is that the Kohanim, led by, again, Aaron's descendants, are essentially telling Levites, you don't have the authority and you don't have God's recognition to go out and do those things that you're doing in your local communities. Everybody has to use the Kohanim, and everyone has to go to Jerusalem to use the Kohanim. So there might actually be here, like, not really a lesson just about Korach, but a lesson about the Levites. Levites are good and they have a role to play, but it's a limited role to play. It's as helpers to the Kohanim. They really don't have authority to offer up anything without the Kohanim. They can prepare it, they can set it up, they can wash it, they can move it, but they can't do it themselves. Think about that as you read this. So each of them took his fire pan, put fire in it, laid incense on it, and took his place at the entrance of the tent of meeting, as did Moses and Aaron. Korach gathered the whole community against them at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Then the presence of the Lord appeared to the whole community, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, stand back from this community, that I may annihilate them in an instant. But they fell on their faces and said, O God, source of the breath of all flesh, when one man sins, will you be wrathful with the whole community? So once again, there's this idea of God wanting to destroy a lot more people, and Moses and Aaron saying, just wait a second, God, please don't destroy more people, just destroy the evil people, just get those people. And again, they appealed to God by saying, God, you're the source of all energy, everything that animates flesh. And this is a beautiful phrase, Elohe ha-ruchot l'chol basar, that you give spirit to all flesh. You can't destroy that. You're the one who gave the flesh animation. You're the one who gives us life. Don't take it away. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the community and say, withdraw from about the abodes of Korach, Datan, and Abiram. So Moses rose and went to Datan and Abiram, the elders of Israel following him. He addressed the community, saying, move away from the tents of these wicked men and touch nothing that belongs to them, lest you be wiped out for all their sins. So Moses gives a warning to the people. Sounds a lot like what Israel does when they're about to destroy a building, which is, you don't have to leave, but if you stay here, you could die. And that is something that Israel has done repeatedly, which is tell people the house or the building, that you're in is being used for destruction, and it will be destroyed now in return. So get out. So it says the people withdrew from the abodes of Korach, Datan, and Abiram. Now Datan and Abiram had come out and stood at the entrance of their tents with their wives, their children, and their little ones. And Moses said, by this you shall know that it was the Lord who sent me to do all these things. They're not of my own devising. If these men die as all men do, if their lot may be common fate of all mankind, it was not the Lord who sent me. But if the Lord brings about something unheard of, so that the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all the belongs that all belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol, you shall know that these men have spurned the Lord. So you'll know that these things are the gods, right? This is God. Scarcely had he finished speaking all these words when the ground under them burst asunder, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households, all Korach's people and all their possessions. They went down alive into Sheol with all that belonged to them. The earth closed over them, and they vanished from the midst of the congregation. So right in the middle of the congregation, these guys got swallowed up. And all Israel around them fled at their shrieks, for they said, the earth might swallow us. And a fire went forth from the Lord and consumed the 250 men offering the incense. So it's not just the earth swallowed it up, but the fire goes forth, just like it did for Nadav and Avihu, and burns up all these other people. It's a terrible scene. It's a terrible scene of destruction. And again, Moses essentially says to the people, you're going to know God's going to do something. So the earth swallows them up. This is not an earthquake. This is not a sinkhole. This is the earth opening up like a mouth and then closing back up. Very dramatic. And what's amazing, of course, is that you can hear them underneath the earth. And again, according to Midrash, according to legend, they are down there and you can still hear them. Now, even though that Midrash sounds fantastic and sounds, again, like where would that come from? It might actually be explaining a natural phenomenon or some type of thing that people would hear in some place in the wilderness, someplace out in the desert, where there's either some type of geysers or some type of tectonic or volcanic activity where people heard murmurings or heard noises that sounded like people or sounded like, people talking, and that this was considered to be the Korach, the space of Korach, if you will. Interesting, folks. This is a very dramatic scene.
Very.
And of course, some of you know what I'm about to show you. This happened last week in Jerusalem. Some of you heard about this.
Oh my.
Some of you heard about this. Some of you texted it. Some people texted it to me. This was literally last week. This happened June 8th. The week that we read this Torah portion, my friends, this happened in Jerusalem. I just want you to know, this doesn't happen often. It's not like this is a common occurrence in Israel or anywhere else for that matter. Sinkholes are very destructive. There was a really bad one in Mexico, I think, last week too. This is bad. And this is, again, it's thousands, millions of dollars of damage, where people have to figure out how do we repair this? How do we fix this? How do we reinforce the ground? This is a hospital parking lot in Jerusalem. So of course, the natural order of business would be, why does this happen, right? So does anybody want to guess? Does anybody want to guess what the discussion was?
Those were very bad cars. Those cars were parked very, very badly.
That's a good one. That's a good one. That these are all people that drove really bad. There's a lot of bad drivers in Israel. I will tell you, there are a lot
all
of bad
drivers.
But yeah, this was a punishment to the bad driver or the bad parking that people did. No, that's a good one. That's a good one, Joyce. No, I will tell you that people looked for a bigger message than that. Though that's a good one. What do you think the big message was? What happened last week in Israel, folks? There was something that actually happened.
They changed leadership. They threw out Netanyahu. So God is swallowing up the cars.
Yes. So what happened, which was obviously it's a political issue, right? This was a political issue too. So look, it's not a secret. The biggest single group that lost with that as a group, I'm not talking about individuals but the biggest single group that lost in this, and believe me, I'm not crying for them right now, but the biggest group that lost power in Israel last week were the religious parties. They got locked out of this coalition. Right. They're almost in every coalition, at least every right-wing coalition. And it's one of the reasons why I like the National Unity Coalition that they had before, which didn't work, but they were going to try a National Unity Coalition with Netanyahu, Lapid, and Gantz, the guys that were. So Benny Gantz was not even part of it. He's not really part of this thing anymore because, and again, most of the people that are part of this coalition, or not most, but the leaders of this coalition that got rid of Netanyahu had been previously members of either Netanyahu's Likud party or coalition partners like the current new prime minister, Naftali Bennett, who's further right than Netanyahu.
Right.
So people were saying, oh my gosh, this is literally in the religious community as they're reading Korach. This is your Korach, folks. This is your Korach. Naftali Bennett, who's a religious Jew who loves Torah and he quotes Torah and he talked about the Torah in his acceptance speech, his first speech before the Knesset. He talked about the Torah. He's more observant. He wears a kippah.
But
He's the first prime minister of Israel, folks. That wears a kippah all the time.
But did he bring in a group of Israeli Arabs to be part of his coalition?
Well, he's part of the coalition that has these Israeli Arabs. So
right.
Needless to say, the people who are the religious parties, and some of them were friends of his, are saying, you're a traitor. And because you're a traitor, this is what happens.
Oh my God.
The ground swallows us up. So I will just tell you that there was a lot of people going, oh my goodness, look what happens. God is going to show us. So this was a very strange week in Israel. And I knew as soon as I saw the sinkhole and I knew it was Parshat Korach last week, I was like, oh, you're going to get people who are going to say that this was a divine act. So I'm sure there were Christians who said it too, but because obviously Netanyahu was very popular amongst evangelical Christians. But
yes.
Oh my gosh. Let me just tell you, folks, this was a strange time to read that portion. So that's the end of the story, but not really, because again, the bad people, the riffraff, well, they're not riffraff actually, because they're not low class, they're high class. They're the top people. They got swallowed up or they got burned up. But now what? Because now we got to figure out, where do we go from here? So it says, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, order Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, to remove the fire pans, for they have become sacred from among the charred remains, and scatter the coals abroad. Well, that's weird. Have they become holy? Because that's what the word says. They become holy. What did they become holy? They became holy with God's fire. Remove the fire pans of those who've sinned at the cost of their lives, and let them be hammered into sheets as plating for the altar. For once they have been used for an offering to the Lord, they have become sacred. And let them serve as a warning to the people of Israel. And so what they did is they didn't toss them away. They didn't throw them away. They didn't bury them. They didn't say, we can never use these again. They actually said, well, God's fire burned them up. And so rather than toss them, we can't. They're holy. They've been touched to some extent by God. We're going to reuse them. We're going to repurpose them, and we're going to create something of them that when people see it, they're going to remember not to get out of line, not to be like Korach and his party, not to be like those Levites and those other leaders that were greedy for power. And here it says, Eleazar the priest took the copper fire pans, which had been used for offering by those who died in the fire, and they were hammered into plating for the altar, as the Lord had ordered him through Moses. It was to be a reminder to the Israelites, so that no outsider, one not of Aaron's offspring, should presume to offer incense before the Lord and suffer the fate of Korach and his band. And that phrase right there, folks, one not of Aaron's offspring, is actually, as you can see, a cautionary tale, a cautionary warning. This message of, unless you're a Kohen, unless you're one of Aaron's family, don't offer up anything. And so what this really is a warning to is the Levites. And we know the Levites for a long time offered up for the people. But the Torah seems to have like either a foreshadow or a, if you will, a probably been written after the fact, written by Kohanim who say, don't do anything like what we do, because we're the only people who have the authority to do it. Well, you think that's going to be okay, right? The next day, the whole Israelite community railed against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You two have brought death upon the Lord's people." Wow. They didn't learn from the scene. They actually got more emboldened and said, Moses and Aaron are going around killing people. But as the community gathered against them, Moses and Aaron turned toward the tent of meeting. The cloud had covered it, and the presence of the Lord appeared. When Moses and Aaron reached the tent of meeting, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Remove yourselves from the community, that I may annihilate them in an instant." Same phrase. Kerega, in a moment, in a second, I'm going to destroy them. They fell on their faces. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Take the fire pan and put it on it fire from the altar. Add incense and take it quickly to the community and make expiation for them. For wrath has gone forth from the Lord. The plague has begun." Plague. So now God is punishing everybody. And Moses and Aaron spring into action saying, we better not let these people get killed by God. Who's avenging us? Who's defending our honor? Who's keeping us alive? These people look like they were going to kill us. But yet Moses and Aaron, or at least Moses, is saying, we can't give up on these people. It's a very, very dramatic and very powerful scene, because Moses essentially risks his life to save people who tried to maybe even kill him. Because it seems like they're about to kill him. I mean, it seems like Moses and Aaron are kind of like they're attacking them. And yet here he is defending them in that same moment. Aaron took it as Moses had ordered and ran into the midst of the congregation where the plague had begun among the people. He put on the incense and made expiation for the people. He stood between the dead and the living until the plague was checked. And this is the word for plague that we use here, magefa. Magefa. This is different than the words that we have for the plagues earlier on in Egypt. It is a word that we used for illness today. For a plague or a pandemic, we would use this word magefa. But this one seems to be like the 10th plague that is actually a plague. So in the Torah, the plagues are oftentimes called the wonders or the miracles that God wrought in Egypt. Here, this is like the 10th plague, the one that was the actual death of the firstborn, magefa, the actual death. And it seems like that's what's happening here, that there's literally God's plague that is killing the people, killing them. And it says those who died of the plague came to 14,700.
Wow.
In addition to the other about 300, right, who died with Korah. So 15,000 people died that day, most of them in the plague. So 300 or so die with Korah and Datan and Abiram in the 250 people and then the Korah and his band. But that's nothing compared to how many people died in the plague. And we always forget that part. Yeah, the earth swallows up these people, the other people get burned up. That's very dramatic. But there was a plague that broke out and literally was killing people. And Moses and Aaron run out and stop the plague in its tracks. Aaron then returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting, since the plague was checked. Dramatically stopped the plague. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and take from them, from their chieftains of their ancestral houses, one staff from each chieftain of an ancestral house, 12 staffs in all. Inscribe each man's name on his staff. There being one staff for each head of an ancestral house. Also inscribe Aaron's name on the staff of Levi." So he's the chief of Levi. Not Moses, by the way. Aaron. He's the one who's the chief of that tribe. "Deposit them in the tent of meeting before the pact where I meet with you. The staff of the man whom I choose shall sprout, and I will rid myself of the incessant mutterings of the Israelites against you. Moses spoke to the Israelites thus to the Israelites. Their chieftains gave him a staff for each chieftain of an ancestral house, 12 staffs in all. Among these staffs was that of Aaron. Moses deposited the staffs before the Lord in the tent of the pact. The next day Moses entered the tent of the pact, and there the staff of Aaron of the house of Levi had sprouted. It brought forth sprouts, produced blossoms, and borne almonds. Moses then brought out all the staffs before the Lord to all the Israelites. Each identified and recovered his staff. And the Lord said to Moses, put Aaron's staff back before the pact to be kept as a lesson to rebels, so that their mutterings against me may cease, lest they die. And so God says to Moses, take that staff of Aaron out, the one that flowered, the one that shows that I am with Aaron. Take that out and let that be a lesson. That staff that came back to life. And we actually talked about this in Midrash class, this staff. And we also mentioned that in the Christian Bible, you have a story of Joseph, the father of Mary's other children, if you will, or Jesus's adopted father, whatever you want to call him, that he has a staff that also sprouts back to life with sprouting. So this is a theme that was used in also later on in Christianity, but the staff that comes back to life is a miracle. And it also, of course, is saying that, again, this is who I've chosen. And there is no other tribe. There's the Levites. It's not like they've lost power, and it's just shifted, though, to Aaron. It's Aaron. This Moses did just as the Lord commanded him, so he did. But the Israelites said to Moses, lo, we perish, we are lost, all of us lost. Everyone who ventures near the Lord's tabernacle must die. Alas, we are doomed to perish. So finally, the people seem to finally get it. But they're not, oh, we get it. Now we know what we're supposed to do. They go into a depression. Mm-hmm. So their knowledge of what they need to do and how they should behave doesn't prompt them to be happy. It doesn't prompt them to be productive. It doesn't prompt them to do and get on the right path. They just said, we're doomed. It's almost like knowing what they had to do didn't change them. As a matter of fact, instead of even fighting back now, they say, we're done. We can't do anything right. And this is where they're at. And so now, if you needed any more example of how the priests, the Kohanim, are given power, let's look at chapter 18. The Lord said to Aaron, you and your sons in the ancestral house under your charge shall bear any guilt connected with the sanctuary. You and your sons alone shall bear any guilt connected with your priesthood. So it starts off with Aaron being told directly by God, not through Moses, by the way, that you and your sons bear any guilt that comes with the Mishkan, that comes with the Beit HaMikdash, with the holy sanctuary, anything. It's your problem. And if it goes wrong, it's on you. Okay, we've kind of seen that already since Leviticus. But what's interesting is that it's affirmed here after God just told them that only Aaron is in charge. So Aaron is kind of like told, no Levites, the Levites can help you, but they're not allowed to offer anything anymore. Or at least the way this writer has it, you're not allowed to offer anything. But yet the next words from God are, and with that comes the responsibility that if you screw up, it's on you. You've got nobody else to blame. So you have tremendous responsibilities, but you also have, again, an obligation and quite an obligation and responsibility that comes with that power. That's good, but it's also very daunting. But it's interesting that we start off with that. It starts off with not the bad news, but the news that You better get your act together. You shall associate yourself with the kinsmen of the tribe of Levi, your ancestral tribe, to be attached to you and to minister to you, while you and your sons under your charge are before the tent of the pact. So the Levites are still there, but they're just your helpers. And you're supposed to take good care of them. You're supposed to associate with them. You're supposed to remember them. They shall discharge their duties to you and to the tent as a whole, but they must not have any contact with the furnishings of the shrine or with the altar, lest both they and you die. So don't think that any Levites can come in just because they're Levites. They can't. They have to be Kohanim. Levites, they shall be attached to you and discharge the duties of the tent of meeting, all the service of the tent, but no outsider shall intrude upon you. As you discharge the duties connected with the shrine and the altar, that wrath may not again strike the Israelites. So amongst those things, guess what? The Levites can do stuff, but the average Israelite can't even do that. And don't let them in. So the Levites can help, but the Israelites can't do that. Only the Levites can. I hereby take your fellow Levites from among the Israelites. They are assigned to you in a dedication to the Lord to do the work of the tent of meeting, while you and your son shall be careful to perform your priestly duties and everything pertaining to the altar and to what is behind the curtain. I make your priesthood a service of dedication. Any outsider who encroaches shall be put to death. The Lord spoke further to Aaron. I hereby give you charge of my gifts, all the sacred donations of the Israelites. I shall grant them to you and to your sons as a prerequisite, a due for all time. Again, Levites, helpers, you get the sacred donations. This shall be yours from the most holy sacrifices, the offerings by fire, every such offering that they render to me as most holy sacrifices, namely every meal offering, sin offering, and guilt offering of theirs, shall belong to you and your sons. You shall partake of them as most sacred donations. Only males may eat of them. You shall treat them as consecrated. So what are they talking about here? They're talking about the alot, the very most holy sacrifices, if you will. Those things only men can eat. This too shall be yours. The gift offerings of their contributions, all the elevation offerings of the Israelites, I give to you and your sons and to the daughters that are with you as a due for all time. Every one of your household who is clean may eat of it. And so again, when we get to the gift offerings, the trumah, those are able to be eaten. And the trumah was actually much more extensive than these holy offerings. So the bigger amount is able to be eaten by everybody. Smaller amount is only being able to be eaten by the men. So the trumah, the big offerings, the annual gifts that the Israelites would give, those were for all the priests, men and women. They all got to partake in those. All the best of the new oil, the wine, and the grain, the choice parts that they present to the Lord, I give to you. The first fruits of everything in their land that they bring to the Lord shall be yours. Every one of your household who is clean may eat of them. Everything that has been prescribed in Israel, and everything that we've said no one else can have, you can have it. The first issue of the womb of every man, man or beast, every being, man or beast, that is offered, all things that come out of, that are born, they shall be yours. You shall have the firstborn of man redeemed, right? You get to have the pidyon haben, and you shall have the firstling of unclean animals redeemed. Take as their redemption price from the age of 1 month and up, the money equivalent of 5 shekels by sanctuary weight, which is 20 gerah. But the firstlings of sheep, cattle, sheep, or goats may not be redeemed. They are consecrated. You shall dash their blood against the altar and turn their fat into smoke as an offering by fire for a pleasing odor to the Lord. So it's interesting because here it seems like, again, at least the bechurim, the firstborn ones, those ones of goats, of cattle, sheep, and goats, those ones are supposed to be all offered up. That first the firstlings. But again, it says in the next line, but their meat shall be yours. It shall be like your breast, like the breast of elevation offering in the right thigh. All the sacred gifts that the Israelites set aside for the Lord, I give to you and your sons, and to the daughters that are with you as a due for all time. It shall be an everlasting covenant of salt, a brit melach, before the Lord for you and for your offspring as well. It's almost over this, and I want to show you something. As the Lord, and then the Lord said to Aaron, you shall, however, have no territorial share among them or own any portion in their midst. I am your portion and your share among the Israelites. And to the Levites, I hereby give all the tithes in Israel as their share in return for the services they perform, the services in the tent of meeting. Henceforth, the Israelites shall not trespass on the tent of meeting and thus incur guilt and die. Only Levites shall perform services of the tent of meeting. Others would incur guilt. It is a law for all time throughout the ages, but they shall have no territorial share among the Israelites. For it is the tithe set aside by the Israelites as a gift to the Lord that I give to the Israelites as their share. Therefore, I have said concerning them, they shall have no territorial share among the Israelites. Well, read a little bit more. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the Levites and say to them, when you receive from the Israelites their tithes, which I have assigned to you as your share, you shall set aside for them 1/10 of the tithe as a gift for the Lord. This shall be accounted to you as your gift with the new grain from the threshing floor, from the flow of the vat. So shall you and your part set aside a gift from the Lord from all the tithes that you receive from the Israelites. And from them you shall bring the gift of the Lord to Aaron the priest. You shall set aside gifts to the Lord from everything that is donated to you, from each thing to its best portion, the part thereof that is to be consecrated. Say to them further, when you have removed the best part from it, you Levites may consider it the same as the yield of the threshing floor of that. You and your household may eat of it anywhere, for it is your recompense for your services of the tent of meeting. You shall incur no guilt through it once you remove the best part from it, but you must not profane the sacred donations of the Israelites, lest you die. What that chapter 18 did, and it came from the very beginning, right, to the very end, is it established what the roles of the Levites and the Kohanim is, what they are.
For all time.
For all time, and for, again, what really is a very interesting set of responsibilities, obligations, powers, a huge amount of wealth, but there's a trade-off. There's a trade-off. Yeah.
For it is your recompense for your services in the tent of meeting. And after the 40 years, there was no tent of meeting. So they did not give services to the tent of meeting because they were in Israel after the 40 years.
Okay, so here's the interesting thing. You're absolutely right. They come into Israel after this. And actually, interestingly, you said that because somehow, and this is what I kind of alluded to at the beginning, 40 years passes right here. Right here, 40 years passes. We never see it. But wait, so here's the weird thing. You're right. But it didn't happen right when they came in, right? Because they come in with Joshua. And then for the next 200 years, from Joshua all the way to the time of King David, there is a Mishkan, there is a tabernacle, and it doesn't find its final home. So it means for 200 more years that happens. And what's interesting about it is it kind of leads to this issue that I again alluded to earlier, which is that, and we don't talk about it a lot. We've talked about it a few times. I know Mike Schwartz and we've talked about it, and we talk about it a lot, which is there is a thing that goes on in the Torah, and it's maybe nowhere as clear as it is in this chapter 18, that there is a struggle in the Torah between the Levites and the Kohanim. There's a struggle between the tribe of the Levites, who see themselves essentially as a priestly tribe, and the Kohanim, who are the group within the Levites who are able to do this. And then even later on, we have a group within the Kohanim, within the priests, that are the only ones who get to do it. the Chazmonaim, the Maccabees, the people we call the Maccabees. So the problem to some extent is as the community grows, what probably happened was that there were too many Levites. And so some of the Levites said, no, only us that are descendants of Aaron, the Levite, get to be the priests. And then later on, when there were too many descendants of Aaron, some of them said, no, only those that are the descendants of Mattathias get to be the priest. So there was a constant problem of who gets to be a priest, who gets this, because as the community grew, as the priests grew, so did the community, right? And so when you have millions of Israelites, or now millions of Jews, if you have a group that's getting money from all of them, what happens is they get super powerful. And we've talked about this before. The Kohanim, the priests, by the time of the Roman period, they owned all of Jerusalem. They literally owned every square block of Jerusalem, the priests. And it's a problem because it says that you're getting this money because of what you do in the tent. But it also says earlier on here that you get this because you don't get any land.
Right.
This is your payment for, to some extent, because you have no territorial share among them or own any portion in their midst. Well, that didn't work because eventually the priests became so wealthy, the only thing they could do was buy property. I'm not making excuses for it.
Right.
They literally said, we have to buy property with all our money. And so they did. They had nothing else to do but buy property. And so they did own the land. They did own it. By that time, the tribes were already in effect. By the time of the Romans, nobody knew what tribe anybody was. The problem was the priests had so much power that they became very corrupt, and it became really an issue of who controlled the money. And it was just a ridiculous amount of money. So the system was inherently flawed. It was broken by that time. And so there really was no way of fixing it. Because the law says, as you said, it says for all time. Right. It doesn't mean, well, until we can't do it anymore. And so this was a big problem.
They had the money and the land. They had everything.
Yeah, and the system became so broken. And so the Torah essentially became something that the people couldn't follow. And to some extent, it's one of the reasons why today we say we really don't want to have a priesthood, because if we did, we know the system would be corrupt. Because first of all, you and I can't tell priests they can't own land. So what would happen is if every Jew in the world sent money to the priests in Jerusalem, the Kohanim in Jerusalem, can you imagine if every Jew in the country, in our country, in the world, millions of Jews, each one of them sent in $5 to the priests. I mean, every year that money would accumulate, and these people would become so wealthy they'd have nothing to do with it other than buy property, right? Become landholders. So you'd have the same problem again, which is that the system would become corrupt, and people would fight for control of that asset. So it became something unwieldy, and it became something that didn't work. There was probably a very good reason why they did it in the first place, which was, again, to work with the Levites, who, as we said before, might have been the only tribe that actually came out of Egypt. Or even if that didn't happen, if the Levites, for whatever reason, weren't able to have a piece of land, they were able to be sustained by this system. But what happens hundreds of years later doesn't work, because the system, it had changed by virtue of the numbers, the sheer numbers of people that we're talking about here. So this is the way the portion ends. Again, it begins with a Levite going off the rails. It begins with Korah going off the rails, but it doesn't end the way you think it does. It doesn't end with the fact that, oh, they don't get to do anything anymore. No, they do get to. They don't lose their job. They just have to be very cognizant of the responsibilities. And on top of it, if the priests have a great responsibility, the Levites also have a responsibility, and both of them have to do what they got to do. They both have to do their jobs. And that's what's so interesting about the way this portion, the whole portion begins, and why that chapter is so interesting, because again, what it really does is lay down the responsibilities, the division of power, the divisions of responsibilities, and how do people not trip over each other, and how do they respect the boundaries, And how do they, again, maintain, how do they maintain this power, this balance of power? And again, how will they understand that with this great power comes tremendous responsibility? And again, the last words of it are, lest you die. Look, you get the best part. I mean, like almost every time you hear there's something great about it, there's also some really serious responsibility that comes with that. So again, it reminds us that people who get to be leaders get tremendous perks from it, but there's also a much, much higher place to fall from if you screw up.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that the Torah and Jewish tradition really upholds, which is that, yeah, there are people who get to be leaders, but if they do, they better not screw up. So this is the thing at hand here. Now, that was the end of Korach. It is very hot in my house again, even though the air conditioner is working. Very interestingly, as you remember, a couple of weeks ago, I told you my air wasn't working. It turned out it was a very easy problem to fix. There was an electrical problem in the attic, which, by the way, when you hear an electrical problem in your attic, you better get it fixed, because I know too many people have had fires start in an attic, right? So got it fixed. It's okay. It's all working. It's great. Sure enough, what happens tonight, my brother, my sister's actually out of town. The air conditioning goes out in their house, and they have to get a whole new set of units. So they're actually in my house right now. They moved in for the next couple of days, because it doesn't look like they're going to be fixed until Monday. So everyone who's watching this on Facebook right now knows that my brother-in-law and my nieces and nephew are without air, but we came to their rescue. No, we were more than happy to do it. They would, of course, do it for us. And we're almost empty nesters here anyway, so we did that. But yes, this is not a time for air to go out, and it's hot even here with the air working. Anyways, we now go into this week's portion, Chukat, which is a little bit shorter, and as I mentioned, is sometimes matched up with the portion that comes after it, Balak. Well, we'll take a look at this, which again, Chukat actually means law, which here is translated as ritual law, which is Chukat Torah. But the word chok is a law. We oftentimes say it's a law that defies rational explanation. It doesn't need rational explanation, maybe is a better way. It's just a law, not one that we get a reason why. And it comes from, again, the second verse here, because the first verse just simply says, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, which we get a lot, Zot Chukat Torah. This is the ritual law that the Lord commanded. Instruct the Israelite people to bring you a red cow without blemish, in which there is no defect, on which no yoke has been laid. And this is the law, as we've talked about before, of the red heifer, which is so strange. And again, we call it a law without rationality, because we don't know why the cow's red. We don't know. We can understand why it doesn't have a blemish, which is really hard to find, which again, people are searching for, because if you have said red cow without blemish, you can now reconsecrate the temple. And this is what you needed it for. Now, we know that this is a strange law. The rabbis knew that this was a strange law. But of course, there's a bigger issue here, which is how do you fix, things? How do you create a way of making things that are made unholy holy again? And what's so interesting here is that we're going to notice something in this portion in just a few sentences. It says, you shall give it to Eleazar the priest. It shall be taken outside the camp and slaughtered in his presence. Now, of course, it's interesting that Aaron is mentioned right here at the beginning, but now his son Eleazar is taking on a larger role. He is the one who's in charge of doing this red heifer ritual. Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle it 7 times toward the tent of meeting. The cow shall be burned in his sight. Its hide, its flesh, and blood shall be burned, its dung included. So this is not like take out part of the meat and eat it. This is all burned up. Everything is burned up, including the poop. It says right there. And the priest shall take cedar wood, hyssop, and crimson stuff and throw them into the fire, consuming the cow. So you can see when we say it's crimson stuff, because it doesn't say what it is, the word that's used there is the word tolat, which we use for crimson, red, something that was red. But it must have smelled nice, because take the cedar and the hyssop, and so there's a smell to this offering, which you could argue maybe you need when you're burning up a whole cow, including all the innards. The priest shall wash his garments and bathe his body in water. After that, the priest may re-enter the camp, but he shall remain unclean until evening. He who performed the burning shall also wash his garments in water, bathe his body in water, and be unclean until evening. Well, a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the cow and deposit them outside the camp in a clean place. To be kept for water of lustration for the Israelite community. It is for cleansing. Wow. So this is fire and water. He gathers up the ashes of the cow. He who gathers it up shall also wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. This shall be a permanent law for the Israelites and for the strangers who reside among you. He who touches the corpse of any human being shall be unclean for 7 days. He shall cleanse himself with it on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and then be clean. If he fails to cleanse himself on the 3rd and 7th day, he shall not be clean. So he uses this water with the ashes together. It creates a sense of purity, and he actually has to do it twice, 3rd day and the 7th day. Whoever touches a corpse, the body of a person who has died, and does not cleanse himself, defiles the Lord's tabernacle. That person shall be cut off from Israel. Since the water of lustration was not dashed on him, he remains unclean. His uncleanness is still upon him. So this is real important. Person who comes into contact with the dead, like what happened after Korach's scene, all those priests, all those people need to be cleansed, like Aaron and his family. But what's interesting, well, I'm not going to ruin it yet. I'm not going to ruin it all, but I want you to see what happens. This is the ritual. When a person dies in a tent, whoever enters the tent and whoever is in the tent shall be unclean 7 days. And every open vessel with no lid fastened down shall also be unclean. So you can see it actually, this uncleanness actually goes towards inanimate objects. And in the open, anyone who touches a person who is killed or who died naturally, or a human bone, or a grave, shall be unclean 7 days. Not any bone, human bone. So it doesn't matter whether the person died of natural causes or was killed, it doesn't matter. Some of the ashes from the fire of cleansing shall be taken for the unclean person, and fresh water shall be added to them in a vessel. A person who is clean shall take hyssop, which again, hyssop is used again, these branches of hyssop, dip it into water and sprinkle it on the tent and on the vessels and people who were there, or on him who touched the bones, or the person who was killed or died naturally, or the grave. The clean person shall sprinkle it upon the unclean person on the 3rd and 7th day, thus cleansing him by the 7th day. He shall then wash his clothes and bathe in water, and at nightfall he shall be clean. If anyone who has become unclean fails to cleanse himself, that person shall be cut off from the congregation, for he has defiled the Lord's sanctuary. The water of the lustration was not dashed on him, he is unclean. That shall be the law for all time. Further, he who sprinkled the water of lustration shall wash his clothes, and whoever touches the water of lustration shall be unclean until evening. Whatever that unclean person touches shall be unclean, and the person who touches him shall be unclean until evening. So this is the law of the waters of lustration, the waters of cleansing, or what we would call the red heifer, which the red heifer is
We have
only
red
important.
cows?
What was that?
Do we still have red cows? And do we ever do this?
Well, we haven't done it in a long time, but there are people, as we mentioned before, that are looking for a red heifer.
The perfect.
More importantly, they're trying to genetically engineer the red heifer. And they believe once it is found, they will take it out, they will burn it, they will create these waters of lustration, these waters of cleansing, purification, and they will be able to reinstate a priesthood. It's a source of imagination, and one would hope not something that we necessarily really want to do, but we don't even understand why, what the logic is behind it. And the rabbis like to point out that the laws of the red heifer are not like normal mitzvot, in the sense that we can't really see like what's behind it. It's difficult to see the logic behind what happens here. But the important thing again is that there's this idea that there are laws that seem to be beyond our comprehension, and yet they're in the Torah, and this is the prime example of them.
And they emphasize the idea of cleanliness, that whatever you do, you have to end up clean, whether you've touched.
And what they're, of course, talking about is really, for the most part, people who've come in contact with the dead.
Right.
And so
which may be a source of illness.
Yeah. And so there is this sense that we have to do what we can to repurify people and find a way for them to be able to do their jobs and be able to be part of the community again. So we don't, the assumption is that that portion comes right after the Korach scene. Right. Even though it's in the next portion, this portion of Chukat, it comes into this portion. Folks, what happens now, though, is that somewhere between, and maybe this portion, you could make the argument that this portion that we just read, or excuse me, the chapter we just read, chapter 19, is actually part of what happens right now. So it either happens with Korach or it happens now, but something happens between chapters 19 and 20. Stick with me for a second here, folks. Okay. And that's why it's kind of good that we read these together. The Israelites arrived in a body at the wilderness of Zin on the first new moon, and the people stayed at Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Now, that's very sad. It's a sad thing, right? The death of Miriam. But what just happened, folks, is that 38 years just passed. They came to Kadesh, which is actually where they were when they first had the incident of the spies. They've come back to that place. But now 38 years passed and Miriam dies. That's our indication of how much time had passed. So somehow, somewhere between this portion and there, or maybe at the beginning of this portion, the 40-year period is over. Wow. The leaders from the previous generation are dying. Even the holy leaders of the generation.
Right.
So now the time has passed. Now, what's so strange that I want you to kind of think about here, and because I don't have an answer. I mean, I really don't. I have no answer for this, but I want you to understand, because you just saw it. You have the scene of Korach, you have the laws of what priests do, and you have the law of the red heifer, which is kind of connected a little bit to the laws of the priesthood. And this is how the priests keep clean. And 38 years passes. We don't know what happened during those 38 years, folks. It's not there. It's not there. You just saw it. The thing just happened. Korach and this.
Wow.
There's nothing there. So what I'm telling you is that we know that we're in the wilderness for 40 years. Everybody, that you all knew. You might have forgotten other stuff. You didn't forget that.
No.
40 years in the wilderness. We learn about what happens in the first 2, and we learn about what happens in the last weeks before they come into the land. We don't know what happened for 38 years. I'm not making it up. I'm not embellishing it. You just saw it. 38 years just passed with one line. So we don't know what happened. Those 38 years are lost. Lost. It's not there. You can imagine what happened, but it's not in the Torah. You can.
Must have been pretty boring.
not a highlight.
No.
It literally is. Yeah, not a great, must not have been a great scene. Now look, sometimes we don't know what happens, and some people have pointed out that the most boring times in history are the parts we don't know about, are just peaceful times. Like people just were okay. There were no wars, there's no conflicts, there's no tragedies, there's no upheavals, and
But there had been a lot of death. The whole generation died in those 38 years.
Yeah,
There was a lot of death.
This is not something that people liked. And so we don't have it. And it's almost as if they were in a frozen stasis for 38 years.
Time warp.
Does anybody know where I'm going with this? Why am I pointing this out right now, folks? Nobody?
I don't know why.
Anybody have any ideas why I'm making this strange point? Well, it'll be very interesting to see, and let's hope this never happens again. But obviously a lot of stuff has happened over the last year and a half. There have been a lot of activities that have kept us busy, debating, focused on things. There have been things that have happened over the last year and a half. But for so much of the last year and a half, folks, you and I, much of the world, has not been very productive. Some people have. I'm not saying everybody, and I don't want to hear, I know this guy who wrote a book, or I know this person who did it, but I will tell you, there were a whole lot of people who spent a whole lot of days doing a whole lot of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, and again, I know we had the election and we had so much other stuff that kept us focused on things and made us think that things were happening. But think about how much didn't happen over the last year. Think about how much, and I can only tell you from my life, and I've talked about it with you before. It's exactly what Joyce just said. I had a whole lot of death over this last year.
Yeah.
I had about 80 funerals over the last year, and I had five bar and bat mitzvahs. I will tell you that the last year and a half to me have felt maybe what the 38 years felt like for the Israelites in the wilderness. I just want to get out of here already. Just get me out of here.
Yeah.
And so when I read this portion this week of Chukat, and I don't want to share this with a lot of people because it's not really a it's not really a it's not really a very uplifting idea, which is that how do we know that 38 years passed? Because the woman died, a very important woman died, Miriam.
Mm-hmm.
And that marked kind of to some extent the end of this really dark period for the Israelites. Folks, this is why this week I thought about this line. I thought about it today, or more likely yesterday, and said, okay, so we got to the end of this period, and it's not so easy to come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not so easy. So, my friends, I really I really sometimes the Torah speaks to you in a way that you like you don't know that that's going to hit. But this June 15th deadline was looming for a lot of us, as saying, well, things are going to change today. But other than Dodger Stadium opening up at 100%, I don't know. Everywhere I went into, they made me wear a mask. Everywhere I went into the bank. I went into a doctor's office today. I went into a restaurant. Every place I went into told me I had to wear a mask in order to go in.
Wow.
I don't know. I thought I got to the end of the period today. I thought I came to the end of the 40 years. Turned out it wasn't so easy.
There is a portion of the population that is clinging to the separation and the masks. It's like a security blanket, and they're not giving it up. I did go to a vitamin store and a restaurant, no mask, and to Walmart, no mask. So I went 3 places, no mask. So I was luckier than you.
Nope. And I was told that doctors' offices are still going to require them. And
yeah, hospitals are requiring.
And I was told that it's up to the people to decide whether they're going to make people or allow people or whatever you want to say. So I don't know what to tell you, folks. I feel like I came to the end of the journey and found out I'm not there yet.
Well, that's
and guess what? So did our ancestors.
Yes.
Because this is a new generation, folks. This is a new generation. I'm gonna have to jump off in a second. So we're gonna finish this chapter for sure. But then I'm gonna have to go. Because again, the generation died out. But Miriam dies. And the next words are, the community was without water. And they joined against Moses and Aaron. And of course, from this, we get this midrash, this lesson, that Miriam, wherever she was, there was a water well that followed her magically, right? And wherever she was, there was fresh water, the Maim Chaim, the living waters of Miriam. Well, then because when she dies, there's no water, right? So they have no water. And but the bigger issue is that when the people didn't have water or food before, what did they do? They came out against Moses. That was the previous generation. Guess what? The community was without water and they joined against Moses and Aaron. The people quarreled with Moses, saying, if only we had perished when our brothers perished at the instance of the Lord. The brothers, their parents, if we hadn't died back then, Why have you brought the Lord's congregation into the wilderness for us and our beasts to die here? Why did you make us leave Egypt to bring us to this wretched place, a place where no grains or figs or vines or pomegranates, there's not even water to drink? Moses and Aaron came away from the congregation to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. Again, same scene. Fell on their faces. The presence of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, you and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes, order the rock to yield its water. Thus shall it produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for their congregation and their beasts. So again, here, because it's a new generation, God doesn't say, we're going to kill all of them and start over with you. He says, give them water. Assemble the community before their very eyes, order the rock to yield. Some of you know what's going to happen here. Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he had commanded him. Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of this rock? And Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Out came copious water, and the community and their beasts drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctuary, my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given them. Those are the waters of Meribah, meaning the Israelites quarreled with the Lord, through which he affirmed his sanctity. From Kadesh, Moses sent messengers to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the hardships that have befallen us, that our ancestors went down to Egypt, that we dwelt in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians dealt harshly with us and our ancestors. We cried to the Lord, and he heard our plea, and he sent a messenger who freed us from Egypt. Now we're in Kadesh, the town on the border of your territory. Allow us then to cross your country. We will not pass through fields or vineyards. We will not drink water from wells. We will follow the king's highway, turning off neither to the right nor the left until we've crossed into your country, out of your territory. But Edom answered him, you shall not pass through us, else we will go out against you in the sword. And remember, Edom are the descendants of Esau. They're our cousins. We will keep to the beaten track, the Israelites said to them. And if we are cattle or drink your water, we'll pay for it. We ask only passage on foot. It is but a small matter. But they replied, you shall not pass through. And Edom went out against them in heavy force, strongly armed. So Edom would not let them cross into their territory, and Israel turned away from them. Setting out from Kadesh, the Israelites arrived in a body at Mount Hor. At Mount Hor, on the boundary of the land of Edom, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, let Aaron be gathered to his kin. He is not to enter the land that I have assigned the Israelite people, because you disobeyed my command at the waters of Meribah. Take Aaron and his son Eleazar and bring them up on Mount Hor. Strip Aaron of his vestments and put them on his son Eleazar. There Aaron shall be gathered unto the dead. And Moses did just as the Lord commanded him. They ascended Mount Hor in the sight of the whole Israelite community, and the whole community. Moses stripped Aaron of his vestments. They put him on his son Eleazar. And Aaron died there at the summit of the mountain. When Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain, the whole community knew that Aaron had breathed his last, and all the house of Israel bewailed Aaron for 30 days. So the chapter begins with the death of Miriam and ends with the death of Aaron. Miriam dies at the beginning, and Aaron dies at the end of the chapter. They die in the same chapter. So the chapter is bookended by the death of the two siblings of Moses. Moses essentially is now left alone. He's the only one of his family to survive. But of course, he's not able to enter the land either. But now not only is he told he doesn't get to enter the land, but now he's by himself. He's alone. And so this portion really does, this part of it, we're going to finish next week. We'll start with chapter 21. And so we read about this little chapter, this little story of a portion about the Edomites not letting us cross over and travel through their land, which was, the ultimate in being inhospitable. And we also read about again, the fact that Moses loses his two siblings, the generation has passed. And not only has the generation passed, but Moses learns that he's not going to be able to lead the new generation. But of course, the sad is that we see that this generation is still, the new generation is still got some of the bad qualities of their parents, which is they still defy Moses. They still don't believe. They still don't have enough faith. And what's so strange, of course, is that people have pointed out, why was Moses penalized so much for not, listening to God and speaking to the rock instead of hitting it? Some people say that Moses tries to show his power with striking the rock. So this is his first chance to really show off for this new generation. And so he shows off where he shouldn't have shown off. But the rabbis actually point out that there's another issue here, which is what Moses says to the people. Moses gathers the people together and says, listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of this rock? Well, first of all, he doesn't say, shall God get the water out for you, but shall we get the water, right? So he's taking credit for it. But there's another issue that the rabbis point out, which is that he says to the people, you rebels. And there's a wonderful midrash that God says to Moses in that moment, listen, Moses, you don't have a right to call them rebels. I'll call them rebels, but you don't call them rebels. And at that point, Moses lost his temper one too many times. When he spoke badly about the people, that's where God said, Moses, you can't come in. And so, again, God maybe wanted to see more out of this generation. Maybe Moses had simply had enough. I like the understanding, and I've always subscribed to this understanding, that Moses just couldn't do it, in the sense that if Moses had done it, the people never would have believed that they could have done anything themselves. And so I will tell you that I believe that Moses couldn't do it, and God didn't want him to do it, because there needed to be a generational change. There needed to be somebody to take the next step. It couldn't all be Moses, because then it would always be Moses. Folks, with that, I'm going to leave you and wish you a great week for the rest of the week. Please, if you can, join us for Friday night. We are going to stream it live. So if you're not, I shouldn't say that, because that's just going to dissuade more people from coming out, maybe. But I'm going to go with Moses, the way of Moses, and the good side of Moses, saying, we want you to be there, and we want you to we want everybody to partake in this, and
but don't strike the rock twice, Rabbi.
Not to phone it in. I will not. But I understand why Moses sometimes loses his temper. I definitely need to take a deep breath sometime. Anyways, folks, take care. Again, stay cool, stay healthy, and try to be with us. 7:00, we're having happy hour before. So there's cocktails and mocktails. You don't have to drink alcohol. You can if you want. And there's also going to be some hors d'oeuvres. So we'll see everybody Friday night. And again, please join us. Everybody, take care. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.